The Radio Memories Network is brought to you in part by Liberated Syndication, podcast publishing made easy, libsyn.com. That's libsyn.com.
Welcome to the Old Time Radio Network detective stories, continuing America's love affair with private eyes. We now go back to the early days of radio and our imaginations with our feature presentation.
Nightmare Town by Dashiell Hammett. Read by Stuart Milligan. Episode 4.
Larry swayed and coughed. Steve peered into his face. "What's the matter with you?" He clapped a hand to his chest, up near the shoulder. "Bullet, up high. Fernie's, but I got him. The big tramp." He laughed, and then became earnest again. "Get the girl. Beat it, now. Now! 10 minutes will be too late. They're coming." "Who?" snapped Steve. "What? Why?" The wounded man caught one of Steve's hands. "We're wasting time. But if you gotta have it, I'll give it to you. Izzard's a plant. The whole damn town. It's all to do with booze. The man I knocked off this afternoon, the one you thought was my father, originated the scheme. You make soda niter by boiling the nitrate in tanks. He got the idea that a niter plant would make a good front for a moonshine factory. More than that, if you had a whole town working together, it'd be impossible for the game ever to fall down. Ormsby took his scheme east and got his backing. A syndicate that could have raised enough money to build a dozen cities. Ormsby, Elder, and Brackett were the boys who managed the game. I was here to see they didn't double-cross the syndicate. And then there's a flock of trusty lieutenants, like Fernie and MacPhail. There was no trouble getting the population we wanted. The word went around that the new town was a place where a crook would be safe, so long as he did what he was told. The slums of all the cities of America emptied themselves here. There was never a bigger game. But it was too big for us. It went to our heads. At first, we played square with the syndicate. We made booze and shipped it out, and we made money. Then we got the big idea. Insurance. We kept on making the hooch, but we got the big idea going for our own profit. Elder managed it, with 3 or 4 assistants. Between them, they became agents of half the insurance companies in the country, and they began to plaster Izzard with policies. Men who never lived were examined, insured, and then killed. Sometimes on paper, sometimes a real man who died was substituted. And at times, a man or two was killed to order. You were with Camp the night he was killed. He was an insurance company sleuth. The companies were getting suspicious. He was foolish enough to trust his reports to the Mail. We read them and sent phony ones out in their places. Then we nailed Mr. Camp. The insurance racket wasn't confined to men. Cars, houses, furniture, everything you can insure was plastered. Next, we sold stock certificates and bonds from one end of the states to the other, and 100 corporations in Izzard that are nothing but addresses on letterheads. And these companies have built up a credit with manufacturers that make you dizzy to total. Then, bingo. The town's wiped out by fire. The stocks of goods are presumably burned. The expensive buildings that the out-of-town investors were told about are presumably destroyed. The books and records are burned. What a killing. And now things are ripe. Next Saturday was the day we picked. That's the day when Izzard becomes nothing but a pile of ashes and collectible insurance policies. When the town goes up in smoke, there'll be hundreds of bodies found in the ruins, all insured, and proof of the death of hundreds of others, likewise insured, whose bodies can't be found. But the game was too big for us. We always weeded out those who came to town looking too honest, especially anybody doubtful who got into the post office, telegraph office, or telephone exchange. They flitted elsewhere in a hurry. Then the telegraph company sent Nova here, and I flopped for her. The rest of them were all for giving Nova the works, but I told them I'd have her on the inside in no time. I really thought I could do it, but I didn't make any headway. The others got impatient. It wasn't easy to keep her from learning what was going on, but we managed it somehow. Then, with next Saturday, the day for the big fireworks, Ormsby told me flatly that if I didn't sew Nova up at once, they were going to pop her. They didn't know how much she'd found out, and they were taking no chances. I told him I'd kill him if he touched her, but I knew I couldn't talk them out of it. Today I heard he'd given the word that she was to be put out of the way tonight. I went to his office for a showdown. Brackett was there. Ormsby salved me along, denied he'd given any order affecting the girl, and poured out drinks for the three of us. The drinks looked wrong. I waited to see what was going to happen. Brackett gulped his down. It was poison. He went outside to die, and I nailed Ormsby. The game is blown up. He was too rich for us. Everybody's trying to slit everybody else's throat. Fernie tried to pot me from a window, but I got him. But I think this thing in my chest is the big one. But Elder will go through with the play. He'll have the town touched off tonight. It's now or never with him. He'll try to... A shriek cut through the darkness. "Steve! Steve!" Steve crossed the porch in a bound and was in the house. Behind him, Larry Ormsby's feet clattered. An empty hallway, a strip of golden light under a door. Steve hurled himself shoulder first at it and was in the room. Leaning back against a table, Dr. MacPhail was struggling with Nova Valance, who twisted and squirmed like a cat gone mad. In front of her, Mrs. MacPhail poised an uplifted blackjack. Steve flung a stick at the woman's white arm. The heavy ebony struck, and she staggered back. Dr. MacPhail, releasing the girl, dived at Steve's legs and carried him to the floor. Steve got a knee free, drove it at the doctor's face. Then he rolled over, got the doctor under him, raised his head, and snapped it down, hammering MacPhail's face with his skull. The doctor's arms fell away, and Steve lurched upright to find the fight over. Larry Ormsby stood in the doorway, grinning evilly over his pistol at Mrs. MacPhail, who stood sullenly by the table. Against the other side of the table, the girl leaned weakly, one hand on her bruised throat. Steve went round to her. "Get going, Steve," said Larry. "We'll go in my car. It can outrun anything in the state. Take Nova over to Blind Reimer's shack. I'll pick you up there. He's the only one in town you can trust. Go ahead, damn you." Steve glanced at the sullen MacPhail woman and her husband. "How about them?" "I'll take care of this pair and be over at Reimer's with the car in 15 minutes. Get going." Steve's eyes narrowed, and he studied the man in the doorway. He didn't trust him, but since all Izzard seemed equally dangerous, one place would be as safe as another, and Larry Ormsby might be honest this time. 5 minutes later, they were hurrying through the dark streets when a muffled shot came to their ears, and then another. The girl glanced quickly at Steve, but didn't speak. Reimer had heard and recognized the girl's footsteps on the sidewalk, and he opened the door before they could knock. "Come in, Nova." He fumbled for Steve's hand. "Mr. Threefall, isn't it?" He let them in, and Steve launched into a hurried summarizing of what Larry Ormsby had told him. The girl listened with wide eyes. The blind man's face lost its serenity as he listened. "If Ormsby comes with his car, as he said, you'll go with us, of course, Mr. Reimer. Tell us what you want to take with you. We'll get it ready." The blind man went to a wardrobe in the room's other end. "I've got nothing to take, but I'll get into warmer clothes." He pulled the wardrobe door open so that it screened a corner for him to change in. Steve went to a window, and the girl stood close to him, her fingers twined in his sleeve. A rifle cracked somewhere in the direction of Main Street, a volley of pistol shots. The cream-colored Vauxhall came out of nowhere to settle on the sidewalk. 2 steps from the door. Larry Ormsby tumbled out and through the door that Steve threw open for him. "Izzard's frying nicely," he cried and clapped his hands together. Steve turned to call the blind man. Reimer stepped out from behind his screening door, a heavy revolver in each hand. The film was gone from his eyes. Cool and sharp now, they held the 2 men and the girl. "Put your hands up, all of you." "I'm dying, Reimer," said Larry. "To hell with you." Without haste, he took a black automatic from an inside pocket. The guns in Reimer's hands rocked the cabin. Knocked into a sitting position by the heavy bullets, Larry steadied his back against the wall, and the crisp, sharp reports of his lighter weapon began to punctuate the roars of the erstwhile blind man's guns. Steve now hurled himself upon Reimer's flank, but just as he reached him, the shooting stopped. Reimer swayed. The very revolvers in his hands seemed to go limp. He slid out of Steve's clutching hands and became a lifeless pile on the floor. Steve went over to where the girl knelt beside Larry Ormsby. Larry smiled up at Steve. "That Reimer. Fooled us all. Phony film on eyes. Painted on. Spy for rum syndicate." His smile grew stiff. "Mind shaking hands, Steve?" Larry flashed another smile at him and died. The front door slammed open. 2 heads looked in. The heads' owners came in. Steve bounded upright, swung his stick. A bone cracked like a whip. A man reeled back, holding a hand to his temple. "Behind me! Close!" cried Steve to the girl, and felt her hands on his back. Men filled the doorway. An invisible gun roared, and a piece of the ceiling flaked down. Steve spun his stick and charged. The light from the lamp behind him glittered and glowed on the whirling wood. The stick whipped backward and forward, from left to right, right to left. It writhed like a live thing as Steve and the girl went through the door. Between moving arms and legs and bodies, the cream of the Vauxhall showed. Swinging his stick, toppling men from the machine, Steve threw himself forward into the car. With his left hand, he swung the girl up over the door. Hands gripped him everywhere. Hands pounded him. He cried aloud with joy when he saw the girl huddled on the floor, working at the car's mechanism. The machine began to move. One of the girl's hands came up to grasp the wheel, holding the car straight along a street she couldn't see. A man fell on her. Steve pulled him off, tore pieces from him. The car swerved, scraped a building. The hands that held Steve fell away from him. Pistols exploded behind them. Then, the desert, white and smooth as a gigantic hospital bed, was all around them. A great sleepiness came to him. What a fight. What a fight. "Look at the sky," she exclaimed. Ahead of them, above them, the sky was lightening, from blue-black to violet to mauve to rose. "My mother has primroses in her garden in Delaware that look like that," he said. "You'll like 'em." He turned his head and looked back. Where they had left Izzard, a monstrous bonfire was burning, painting the sky with jeweled radiance. "Goodbye, Izzard," he said. His head slid over against her shoulder, and he went to sleep.
Nightmare Town was read by Stuart Milligan. It was abridged by Neville Teller and produced by Elizabeth Allard.